All right, welcome to our April 2024, May 2024 live Q&A call. So before we get started, just want to remind everyone that if you want to ask a question, you can do so by either raising your hand or you can put your question in the chat. And if I don't have any questions from those of you that are on the call, I have a couple questions here that I will go over. So before we get started, I want to let you know, so my mom is here, but she was having some problems with her internet. So I'm not going to bring her on and do our normal little chat because there was quite a bit of delay when we were talking just an hour earlier. So we're gonna skip that for this time. But if you have a question and you want to put it in the chat, she will let me know. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start by just maybe going over what we've added to the accelerator since our last meeting. So let me pull that up real quick. And then we'll go from there. Share screen. Okay. All righty then. So I actually showed some restraint this time. I did not put a bunch of stuff in there. So one thing I did, I put a quick win in here about how to navigate the hidden obstacles inside your organization. So this quick win is about really being intentional and proactive about bringing to light cultural or rules and regulations that govern how your organization operates, how decisions get made, who are the major influencers, who are the major players, how they make decisions about who gets resources and who gets promotions and things like that. So all organizations have these ways of working, and some organizations make them very explicit. They have rules, regulations, SOPs, they're written down, they're visible. Other organizations don't. Other organizations operate more on, you got to know the right person and who you know will help you kind of navigate through the labyrinth of decisions and ways of working that just exist inside organizations. And regardless of what type of organization you actually work in, it is really important for leaders to make sure that the people on their team understand what those different rules and regulations are, so that they don't just get tripped up and constantly get frustrated because here they are, you gave them a task, they're working really hard to get it done, and then boom, it turns out, oh, well, actually, that's not the way we do things around here, or something like that. And so what I talk about here in this quick win is a framework that can actually help you to think through, well, how might I, as a leader, think about my organization and uncover what some of these hidden rules are, so that I can then explicitly bring them up in conversation and staff meetings, things like that, explicitly talk about them to my team so that they become aware. And lots of times, even organizations that do a lot of SOP writing and try their best to make it make these things explicit. Even those organizations have these unwritten rules of the road. And so sometimes it can be a challenge. It's one of those things where you don't even realize that you know these things, but obviously you do, because you've gotten to a leadership level. So the framework that I really like, it's from MIT. It's called the 3 Lenses of Organizational Design. And it talks about organizations from a strategic lens, which is around processes and SOPs. And then there's a political lens, which is around power structures and influence and hierarchy. And then there's a cultural lens, which in this case, culture very specifically means the culture of the organization itself. And this is around like the symbols that are used and the words, sometimes words that you use and around like what's really important to this organization. And so I've got a couple of guiding questions that you can use to help you think through, well, what are some of the things inside of my own organization that we can do, that I can think through, that I can maybe help teach my team. And I will tell you that when you do this, when you start to do this in a systematic way, you're going to find that your team is very, very pleased with this kind of information, because right now they're just constantly getting frustrated. They're hitting these stumbling blocks and they don't understand why. And those things cause them to just be frustrated and skeptical. And if you can come and say, oh, well, this is the best way to get a decision made, in this particular organization. And here are the people that, maybe they're not on the org chart, but here are the people that we actually need to consult with in order to make sure that, that we get these boxes checked before we try to get something improved. When you do that, people are like, oh, okay, now I know what I need to do. And now I can just go and do it, as opposed to kind of constantly feeling like you're just sort of walking around blindly and hitting roadblocks. So this is, that's something that I put in there. It'll take some practice. If you've never really looked at your organization in this way, it'll take some practice, but I can tell you, I actually teach this methodology in a 90-minute course. I do once a year, I do this Harvard Business School case study for a class that's at Penn State. And they read the case study on their own. And then we come in, I teach them the framework. I ask them the guiding questions. They go out into breakout sessions and answer those guiding questions. So I give each, there's 3 groups. Each group gets one of the lenses. And then we come back and have a conversation. And really, I feel like they kind of understand, oh yeah, when I first heard the case, I didn't even realize that, there were these things going on. But then when you started asking these questions, it helped me to understand the organization that is described in the case in a much deeper level. So I strongly encourage you to give it a try. The other thing I added actually was just the live Q&A. I actually just did this morning. So I did the live Q&A from April. So put that in there. I talked about somebody wanted to restructure their organization. How can they successfully implement the change? So we talked about change management. We talked about safety planning for a new pilot facility, and then talked about how to position yourself for a new role and how to really articulate your experiences in the context of specific skills and traits that are talked about in a job description, and how you can do that very systematically using the accomplishments inventory that I've shared with you many times before. So that's what's been added to the accelerator since our last meeting. And now I'm just going to go ahead and transition to the questions. So I don't have a lot of questions, so this might be a short Q&A if I don't get many questions from the audience. So the first question is, okay, this is from a startup founder, and he says, my core team is highly motivated because of the vision of our organization. We started this business together. Now we're starting to add more people to the organization, and I, as the founder, am getting further and further away from the people that are kind of on the ground. And I feel like they're not as motivated by the original vision of the company. So how can I motivate these people? So that's a great question. A leader's core role, one of the leader's core role is to motivate people. And you are absolutely right. It's very savvy to recognize, okay, the mission and vision of this company that these startup founders have is not necessarily going to be the most important motivating factors for somebody who, does customer service or is even dealing with the technology or other things. And so in general, the way that you can help to motivate your team is to ask them. I mean, there's not really a set way to motivate people because people are all different. I mean, there are a couple of kind of key themes that typically resonate with people, and that's, being compensated for what they're worth. There's, having a sense of autonomy to the extent that they can about whether either the work that they do or when they do the work or how they implement the work, having a sense of purpose in their work, which again, the sense of purpose at an individual level may be different than the purpose of the overall organization, but having a sense of purpose. Those are some of the core things: feeling respected, feeling valued as an employee. Those are some of the core basic things that motivate people. The challenge is that you can't really know exactly what it is that's going to motivate any one individual. And so what I think, rather than kind of thinking through a list of tactics that you might employ, I think a better way to think about it is how can I make sure, especially as a top leader, how can I make sure that my frontline managers, which is the people that are, leading these folks, how can I make sure that they are communicating with their people in a consistent and regular way, building rapport with them, and actually having development and having development conversations with them such that they can figure those things out, because again, they're going to be different. And so how can I make sure that the frontline supervisors are having one-on-ones with their staff, they are clearly communicating the expectations, and then talking with them about, hey, you're really doing a good job here, we really value you. Where do you see yourself in the next few years? What are some ways that, that we can give you the recognition and the motivation that you deserve, and then listening to those answers. That's what you as a leader can really focus on as your primary tactic, is saying, okay, I'm expecting all of my managers to be having these weekly one-on-ones with their team. I want to make sure that you're not just talking about deliverables and talking about what needs to be done, but you are also at least, once a month or once a quarter, whatever frequency makes sense for you, you're having these development conversations so that we can really understand what our folks need in order to feel valued in the company. That's really what you as the executive can focus on as your primary tactic. And then of course, being responsive to the feedback that you get. So, if you're getting feedback about, well, overwhelmingly people really would love more autonomy. Okay, is there a way to do that? Or people would really love, to have fewer meetings and more and more time to do deep work. Okay, as the leader, what can you do to try to actually implement these things? But that's the approach that I think is much more it's much more useful than it is to try to say, oh, okay, well, it looks like people are motivated by having, coffee. Let's add coffee. Let's have free coffee, let's have more parties. Let's have free coffee. Don't focus on that unless your frontline supervisors have come back to you and said, this is what our people want. Okay, then by all means, think about how you're going to implement that. But don't just sort of read the literature, read the newspapers, listen to your peers to say, oh, this is what will motivate my team. No, you have to get the information from the people themselves. And the way to get that is by having this consistent touch points from their first line supervisors, so that they're constantly building rapport and then they feel comfortable really talking about what it is that they need. And then implementing that, so that your decisions on how to implement things are based in data, from your people, not just, made up stuff from somewhere else, basically. So that's the strategy for motivating people. So again, just to summarize, the strategy for motivating people is to implement systems such that frontline supervisors are in constant communication with their people, giving them feedback and getting feedback from them about what they need to be most effective in their jobs and to stay motivated from a retention standpoint, and that those frontline supervisors are then feeding that back up to you, and you are doing your best within the scope of the capabilities, budgets, all of that, to implement what they're learning from those conversations as motivations. Some of them might be very specific to certain individuals. Others you may more broadly, apply across the entire organization, and you'll just have to use your discretion to figure out how you're going to implement those things. Okay, the next question is, as I'm thinking about developing my leadership, should I be focused on doubling down on my strengths, or should I be focused on improving my weaknesses? So I think about this in terms of upper and lower control limits. So I think that most, the core leadership traits, and, I kind of like to use standard assessments. And I think I've even talked about, so I talk about some of these core traits in a post around how I learned to overcome my weaknesses. So I did post about this. So if we can make a note of that, we can put the link in here. But so just to kind of level set on what are the key leadership traits, first of all. So, if you do a 360 assessment or even a self-assessment on leadership, it's pretty common across all these different instruments and, leadership books and all these other things about what kind of these key traits are. And then if you can get an assessment or some feedback from others, you'll kind of know. I'm sure you're really strong in certain areas. You can consider these strengths. You're probably average in certain areas, and then there are probably a couple of traits where you are weak, are lower than desired. And so what I suggest that you do is that you put a development plan in place to raise any of these weaknesses just to sort of a functional level, just to making sure, okay, I'm not completely alienating my team, my staff, or my peers, or I'm not, completely missing certain performance metrics because of any of these weaknesses that you have. So you just want to get them to a functional level. And by that, I mean, just get them inside the control bands, okay? Just get your weaknesses inside control bands. And then you can probably stop there. So just taking those couple of first steps to raise those weaknesses up to just a kind of a functional level is probably sufficient. Doing more than that, trying to convert that into a strength, is going to take a lot of effort on your part, because the reasons these things are our weaknesses are just based on sort of natural tendencies, how you grew up, the things you were exposed to. So these are habits that have been around for a long time, and so to completely change them can be a challenge and probably diminishing returns. So you just want to raise those up to be kind of in this functional level. And now you have your strengths. By all means, leverage your strengths for as often as you can when it makes sense. There is, though, a challenge, and we see this a lot in leaders, where you can overuse your strengths so much that it can actually become what's called a derailer, which just means that it's like, oh my gosh, this is you know, this is something that now it's too much of a good thing is another way to think about it. And that it's actually turning into a negative. And so you do need to be careful about that. And again, your assessments will help you understand that. And there may be times when your natural tendency would be to do something and you know, it's often a strength, but there are situations when it calls for, you know, not using those traits, or to even just dial them back a little bit. So I'll give you a couple of examples, maybe just hopefully to make this a little more concrete. So I'll use myself first for the weakness. So again, it's in this post that I talked about, that I wrote around leadership weaknesses, but I'll just remind you. So, you know, when I take an assessment, typical assessment, I get flagged for being reserved. So what does that mean? That means that I, you know, don't talk a lot. I'm not social. I oftentimes am very terse in just my communication style, few words. It often sounds like I'm barking out orders. That's just, you know, that's just the way my natural communication style is. And so because of that often can alienate people, that can intimidate people, that can make it hard, that can make people fearful of, you know, what I'm doing, what I'm going to say, or feel like I'm not collaborative with them. So that's a challenge. That's a legitimate thing that could, if I don't address it, it could keep me from being as effective as I really want to be. And so that is something that I worked on, getting it from, you know, below the line to inside the control limits. And there's strategies that I use for that. You know, I try to smile a lot. I try to, you know, just be mindful of my body language. I try to use what are called softening phrases. So when I'm talking to people, I will often, you know, ask questions. I will often, instead of just, you know, blurting out what I think the answers are, and those sorts of things can just help to mitigate that naturally reserved tendency of mine. Now, I do not do it all the time. It does take energy to be more self-aware and to think through those sorts of things. So, you know, as I was saying, I focus on just getting myself to, you know, above the lower control limit so that I'm functional, so that people want to work with me, that I can build rapport with people. So people are like generally happy to see me when I walk in a room, and not just sort of like, oh my gosh, you know, let's run away. Oh, Angelique's here. Everybody, let's leave. Right. So that's my goal there. But, you know, I stop there. I do not want to, like, you know, be the life of the party. That's not my goal. That's not my goal. And it would take a lot of work for me to try to get there. And so I honestly don't think I need to do it. You know, the way I see things now, I can be pretty effective just having gotten myself, you know, from, you know, sitting in the corner and not talking to anybody to, you know, being a little bit more social and a little bit more approachable through body language and, you know, word choice and things like that. So that's an example of, you know, going above the line, so going from below the line to just being inside those control limits. Now, on the other side, I have a client right now who is really excellent at rapport building. He's like almost the opposite of me. And it's funny because I'm like, I'm glad I'm your coach, because I can help you with this. He is very, not even gregarious isn't the right word, but he's just very warm, very inviting, will always, you know, want to ask questions about how are you, how's your family. That's just his natural, you know, way of doing it. And he's genuinely interested. It's not like he's just, you know, making this up. So people, you know, want to collaborate with him, want to be around him, want to work with him. Except that sometimes he can go overboard with that. And so sometimes, you know, he might be, and this is, you know, he can be in a meeting that has a short time frame, and you know, the decision makers need a quick decision. And if you have, let's say, 10 minutes, that you can't take the first 5 minutes to inquire about how people are feeling and how their families are doing. Like people are impatient, and that kind of approach doesn't always work. doesn't work in those kinds of situations. Similarly, there are people, and again, it's funny because so we talked to him, like, so I am one of these people, but I personally don't matter in his work context, but he knows he has peers and leaders who are this way, who just are not interested in that, no matter how much time you have, right? So it's like, it feels intrusive. And so if you don't have enough self-awareness to kind of, and what we're actually working on together is what is something called mirroring, which is to say, if you come into a room or come into a conversation with someone and you start with your open, expansive approach and your, inquiry about feelings and families and things like that, it's perfectly okay to start that way. But if you start that way and the person that you're talking to says, I'm fine. How's your family? They're fine. You need to be able to get the hint that they don't want to talk about that kind of stuff for the next 15 minutes, and you need to adjust. And so that's sort of the flip side of, this is a strength for sure. Being able to rapidly build rapport with people in one-on-one conversations and in groups is absolutely a leadership strength. And if you always apply it at the same level in every single context, it will not be effective for you. There are absolutely contexts where maybe time constraints is one, and or certain people who really are just put off by that kind of communication approach. And if you don't know how to adjust for that, then you are going to find yourself basically over the line, and you are in a zone of ineffectiveness. And so that's really kind of how I think about these different strengths versus weaknesses, is that it's more about, can you have the capacity to put yourself in the optimal zone when the situation requires it. And that requires some self-awareness on your own part, and also some situational awareness about, okay, what does this context call for? And so people can struggle with, they can't, increase themselves in a certain way to be more effective when it calls for it, or they can't decrease, certain traits when it calls for it. And so that's really where I think the leadership development and where the focus should be, and less about, turning yourself into, like if you struggle with public speaking, like, you don't need to turn yourself into somebody who delivers TED Talks. Like, that's rarely going to be something that's going to move the needle for you and your effectiveness. But if you can't, if you can't stand up in front of a room and a room full of people and articulate any ideas whatsoever, without, breaking out into a sweat, or, then that's something you probably need to work on. So that's just how I kind of think about the strengths versus weaknesses, is kind of making sure that you can be in the zone of effectiveness. Sometimes that means amping things up a little bit that maybe you're not comfortable with. Other times it could be cranking things down a little bit for things that you're really, really comfortable with, in order to kind of stay in this zone of effectiveness. And then the last question I had is, I'm starting a new business, and how can I get my name out there and become more known for my area of expertise? And so the way to do that is to, first of all, identify who needs to know about you. Okay. How do you think through who needs to actually know about the products and services that I'm offering, the decision makers, the influencers, et cetera. And it's going to vary widely based on whatever it is your business is. But once you understand who you're targeting, and it's probably going to be more than one type of person, but once you figure out who you're targeting, then you can think about, okay, where are they kind of congregating, either physically, like if there's conferences or things like that they attend, or where is their attention congregating? So that could be like, are they reading certain journals, or are they reading certain newspapers or social media accounts or social media groups or things like that? So either where they're physically or where their attention is. And then once you kind of figure those things out, then you can start putting yourself into those pathways. And so for most of you, there's going to be probably two approaches. So one is going to be a technical approach. And so that means if your business is in a certain technical area, there are probably professional societies and technical conferences that are related to that area. And so you should be attending those conferences, not only as a sort of trade show person or vendor who's trying to sell something, but also in the technical components of it. And if you can even like write papers or have somebody from your team write papers in the technical conferences and the technical journals, then I highly recommend that you do that, because for many of you, if not maybe all of you that I'm thinking about who's at least seeing this as of today, 2024, you all have these highly technical businesses that, while the final decision maker might be an executive, business executive, MBA type, along the line of the decision-making process, you are going to hit some experts, some engineers, scientists and engineering experts who are going to be expected to say, is this person legit? Like, is this business even really legit? And if you've got some actual conference, papers from technical conferences that they can read and vet your technical capabilities, that is really going to help you become known in your field. So one is the technical side. The second is going to be more of like the influencer trade show kind of less technical, more maybe business focused side of things. And again, understanding where the attention of those people is important. And then creating some sort of content that talks about who you are, who the business is, the problem that you're solving, any case studies that you may have around how your products and services have helped solve problems for people. Those things will then be directed toward that other channel or channels. So that could be LinkedIn, that could be YouTube, that could be Instagram, TikTok, it could be trade journals. That's where the sort of more sales and marketing and business fundamentals goes. And so for all of you that are in this group, as of today, you've got at least those two pathways to go, because you have influencers, decision makers who are going to be technical. And so you need to demonstrate your technical competencies through these technical conferences, journals, publications, etc. And then you're going to have more of the business influencers. And so you need to create business type content and publish it on the business related channels. And then the only other thing I would say is that this takes time. So regardless of whatever stage you are at in your business, in your venture, I would really start thinking about doing these things today, because lead time on it actually generating traffic back to your business is, it's 12 to 24 months. So you can start the clock now, or you can start the clock, later, but it's 12 to 24 months for you to really start driving traffic to your business when you use these two channels. And that, it doesn't matter if you do paid ads, it doesn't matter if you even, already have an in certain areas. That's just kind of how long this process takes to kind of get the word out, unless you are somehow going to put, probably tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars in ad spend and boosting yourself across all of the channels simultaneously and repetitively, which most of you probably can't afford to do, and probably aren't ready to do yet either, because you really need to have very clear messaging and product market fit and case studies and all of that before it's worth even putting a lot of spend behind your you're sort of getting the word out stuff. So for now, though, focus on kind of creating the content and recognizing, okay, first I need to understand who is going to be involved in these decision-making processes. Highly likely to be engineers and business people, recognizing that those different stakeholders, their attention is in different places. And so if you really want to be highly effective, you will hit them both. One with deeply technical content that establishes your credibility as having a solution, understanding the fundamentals of your solution, and being a player in your field of expertise. And then the other is on the business side. And the business side, they're interested in value proposition, the problems that you're solving, case studies, examples of showing how you've done it before, because they're thinking about, okay, what's going to be my return on investment if I engage with this person. So two very different channels, two different types of content, and then do it. Then you got to do it consistently and expect for a 12 to 24 month lead time before it actually results in any kind of conversions to consistent sales or anything like that for you. So that is how you become more well known. Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat or online. So I think we're gonna call it a wrap for today. So let's see, our next meeting, let me just pull that up real quick so I can mention it. Our next meeting is going to be June 19th at noon. So I'll see you then. Okay, thanks. Bye.